Hi guys, welcome back to What Is This Weapon with me, Jonathan. This one looks a little obvious, I realise. It's the classic, the iconic Colt 1911, or the government model, which really ought to be the overarching name for this whole series of pistols. But the military designation of M1911 has really just stuck. We call them all 1911s, even the very modern derived types, unless it's a double stack, in which case we call it a 2011. So we're very fixated on that 1911 date, and it is significant. So why are we looking at this one? Well, two reasons, I suppose. The first is, I'm sure some of you are aware of the Colt Combat Commander. This was a 1970s, I believe, variant of the 1911, reduced in overall length. So about don't quote me on this, about an inch off the barrel and the slide to make the whole thing shorter. Less weight in the gun, and importantly, easier to get out of the holster, easier to get to clear clothing if it's under a jacket or something. All the reasons you would want to have a compact pistol. Something like a Volta PPK, designed as a compact pistol from the start. Something like a Colt or even the Glock, or any modern pistol, they'll typically start with the full-size design and then sort of either scale it down or more usually sort of just remove some length and usually some height from the grip as well. This does not have a shortened grip. It does have that shortened barrel and slide. What it isn't, though, is that Combat Commander. Now, this is really probably more my ignorance than anything else, but it turns out there was in fact a Colt Commander before there was a Combat Commander, significantly before that, actually. Now, before we get back to that history and the other reason that this is interesting, which is, as you've probably guessed, there's a British connection here, albeit tenuous. So here's one I had secreted about my person. And this is actually an M1911, not an A1. This Colt Commander is derived from the A1 pistol. So it has the curved back strap, it has the cutaways on the frame, it has the shortened trigger. It's a spin-off of what we know as the Second World War version of the 1911, the A1. Came in from 1926, in fact. So I say all that, well, partly to illustrate a bit more about what this is, but also to differentiate it from the arbitrary choice I have made here of an early commercial 1911. Just because it looks so nice, I couldn't resist choosing this one instead of an ordinary World War II 1911. So don't be distracted by how shiny this is or by its early features. It's here just really to show you, without letting them touch, that it is not quite an inch actually. I will check the precise length difference for you, just so you're not wondering about that. But it's enough of a difference to make a difference, as it were. So we can set aside our ordinary military full-size 1911 again and go back to this thing. So other differences, well, it's not just length, it's also weight. So reducing the length also reduces the weight, not insignificantly, but there are other ways to reduce weight. And this actually has, and it's very hard to demonstrate on video, unless we had a set of scales, it's a fair bit lighter. This is an aluminium or aluminum alloy frame, and it really does make a difference. Again, I'll double check the weight and show you the comparison on that as well. But those two things, reduced weight and short length, really does make this a lot handier, a lot more compact, and a lot more suited to its intended role, which is wearing it under clothing, essentially. So this thing, this is a commercial offering, first produced in 1950. I assume it's hitting the stores soon after that. People watching this may even have one. I don't believe it was incredibly prolific, but it was a thing for a while before it went away, and then came back as the Combat Commander a fair bit later on. One more notable feature here that makes this suitable for carry and not to snag on your clothing as you draw it, and that's this bobbed hammer here. Round hammer. You'll have seen this on other pistols of various types. it's a typical feature. The classic hook shape of a pistol hammer is liable to catch on all sorts of things. Hence the modern preference for striker-fired pistols. But if you don't have striker-fired, you either want a sort of shrouded hammer or a very short little bobbed hammer. Now, most of the time you don't need to operate the hammer unless you need to, say, decock. So it's not a big loss to lose that leverage of the spur hammer, and it keeps the whole thing a lot more compact. You're much less likely to catch on your jacket or something and be unable to shoot back if you're being attacked, whatever. So those are the features that make it what it is, as it were, as a product. And as I say, it's available to the American public, and I guess anywhere else it was marketed in the early 50s. There's one more notable feature of this that was a surprise to me. Knowing about the Combat Commander in the traditional 45 ACP caliber, but not knowing about this predecessor is, and you'll forgive us for pointing the muzzle toward the camera, but this is inevitable on this series. It's not aimed at anyone currently, but we have the big old muzzle of the 45 here on my left, your right, and you can see that this is substantially smaller. It is in fact in 9mm parabellum, 9x19. I was a little surprised that there was a 9mm 1911 available that early on. They're pretty common later on, and other companies copying the design have them in 9mm. It's sort of the Browning high power caliber in a 1911 package. So it becomes a thing later on, more so, or so I thought. So I just think it's interesting that as early as 1948-9, when they're looking at this, that for all the 45 caliber is so associated with the 1911, and the American market, military and civilian, is absolutely dead set on it as a big diameter bullet with a lot of weight behind it, that they're thinking some markets might still want the largely European 9mm parabellum round. Now that also gives you one more round in the magazine. And it is only one more round because it's a single stack magazine, of course. This is not a 2011 with a double stack width grip. So in fact, this is worth showing because on the base plate, just so you don't get your magazines mixed up and try to jam a 45 cartridge in a 9mm mag or vice versa, the base plate is clearly marked 9mm Luger, Colt. So it's kind of weird to see the word Luger on a 1911. Of course, they're a similar vintage, the 45 ACP and the 9mm Parabellum or Luger. 1908 and 1911 in practical terms, and they have both persisted to this day as viable pistol cartridges. 9mm has found more favour largely because you can fit more rounds into the gun. Now in this case it only gives you one more, so 8 in the magazine rather than 7, but one round more is not insignificant when you're talking the difference between 6 in a revolver, 7 in a normal 1911 and 8 in this, and then 1 in the chamber plus 1. That's a not insignificant capacity for a pistol of the mid-20th century, certainly one that's as compact as this. Albeit they have not been able to reduce the height of the frame. So the other aspect that's really interesting for us, being a UK museum, is that the British authorities were actually looking at this as a viable new pistol. It's surprising on, I think, several levels. Firstly, that at that time, the British weren't looking at a British pistol. Well, they were, but they were also looking at an American pistol in quite a keen way from what we can see from the archives. And that, well, it's just not really logical. With us, to our modern minds looking back, we think, well, they had the Browning high power. With the paratroopers had it in 1944. The Canadians have adopted the English-made Browning high power, 13 rounds, 9mm, modern pistol. And that was in service ultimately with the British Army until 2013. And is renowned as a good design. Surely by 1948, which is when the British are looking at this, and Colt is starting to is clearly telling customers that they have this, or military customers that they have this option coming down the pike. It's, to me anyway, pretty surprising that we, as it were looking at this thing. So why are the British trying to replace, well, firstly, the Enfield/Webley Mark IV 38. Well, you can see why they might be replacing that. Today we would regard that as far too low capacity and not powerful enough. So if that was the only thing that they were replacing, it would make more sense. And bear in mind that was the general issue pistol still. The Browning high power was not across the whole army by any means. But you know, why are they not just going, let's just fully adopt the Browning? And it's tied up with, and this is not a book plug, but it is tied up with the whole EM2 story, which of course I find fascinating, and I hope some of you do as well, which is the British trying to adopt their equivalent of the German assault rifle, reduced power cartridge, compact, relatively lightweight, a modern infantry rifle, and that whole story of it going off the rails. Well, part of that was, will they, won't they, get rid of the submachine gun, or the machine carbine, which at that time is still the Sten Mark V. The Patchett, the future Sterling, has been developed and ultimately will be adopted, but they don't know in 1948-49 whether they're going to go direct replacement for the rifle, keep the submachine gun for at least for some roles, and then have a pistol as well for officers or whoever else needs a pistol. So the memo that we've found, it's in a file at the National Archives called Specification of the Pistol, dated 1948. And the Director of Artillery (Small Arms), by the name of Watts, is essentially getting the horses running on find us a new pistol. If they stick with the machine carbine, then it will have to be full power 9mm, which is what the Brownings that they do have are firing. This is where 9mm parabellum as such has been bumped up in power to the point where it will reliably run a Sten gun. So in other words, your choice of pistol cartridge in that case is tied into what you're running your submachine guns on. And this document says if we don't go with a machine carbine, i.e. the EM2 will, or whatever it ends up being, we know it was the EM2, this is 48, they don't know that yet. If we have the EM2, that cartridge will do as a submachine gun cartridge because the rifle will also be the submachine gun. If that's the case, we can look at a different pistol. And what they seem to be going for is the lightest possible pistol that will also kill people, to put it bluntly. And this is really the logic behind the 38 Webley / Enfield. People look at it now and think that's pathetically weak and tiny and not very good. Well, the British recognised at that time something that's sort of true and not, depending on your point of view, which is that a pistol is a weapon of last resort. It's a personal defence weapon. It's not, in the scheme of things, militarily that significant, unless you are something like a paratrooper or someone who needs to be able to fight up close with a handgun. So the pistol for everyone should be the best possible stopping power for the smallest possible size and weight. That seems to be the logic here, and that's why they're looking quite seriously at the Colt Commander. So I could actually have had on the table as well a Webley 38, because they're looking at, that's their minimum acceptable ballistic capability. The document refers back to a ballistic trial that was done that 9mm comes out very well in, unsurprisingly, in terms of penetration and wounding effect. But ideally they want something between the two. And one of the options they talk about is essentially a downloaded 9mm back to Luger level power, as it were. So like 1100 feet per second instead of 1300 feet per second, which is what the British Mark II Z Sten gun ammo, which is what you would have to standardise on, is running at. So one option is to have 9mm parabellum in terms of case dimensions and stuff, but the lightest weight bullet you can get away with, and a reduced powder charge, because you won't have a submachine gun that you need to reliably operate with that powerful cartridge. Or, ideally, you'd find a cartridge between 38 revolver and 9mm Mark II Sten gun ammo. And so that's the story that they go off and try to investigate. The snippets we've been able to find tell us only that they were looking at, obviously, the existing Webley, but they want to get rid of that, or Enfield, I should say Enfield, really. That was the primary design, the company, for the Mark IV 38. They're also looking at a Smith & Wesson, an unnamed Smith & Wesson that I would have to guess is the Model 39 or something similar to it, which is a compact, I guess relatively lightweight, 9mm self-loading pistol, double action. And that's the interesting thing about this requirement that's issued, is that they require a weight. The weight they want to get it down to, if possible, is 22 ounces, which is about 600 grams. That's a bit less than a Glock 26, which is a very modern, very small pistol. So really quite surprising. That's less than a Makarov pistol, for example. It's about the same as a Walther PPK. That was an option that was around at the time. Now, the trade-off comes, and this is what they're looking at, the relationship between weight, and I guess therefore size, and cartridge power, because roughly speaking, the bigger the pistol, the more powerful the cartridge it can handle. So they're like in a role-playing game, they're pulling the slider across to lightweight, and ballistic capability is going down, to use a silly analogy. And we don't know yet where this is going to go in 1950. So we don't quite know the Smith & Wesson, but they buy 10 of those. They buy 10 of these from Colt, and they have a bit of a trial. Hopefully we'll find in due course more information on those actual trials. But this ties back to one of our earlier videos as well, because the other pistol that's being trialed at the same time, I think they only have one example of it though, is the Webley Durack, which I just mispronounced. But if you go back to the video we did on that pistol, I say it correctly there. And this is this very space-age British Walther P38 knockoff. There's a fairly hilarious letter exchange between the Ministry of Supply and Webley, who obviously are trying to push their new design, saying that your requirement, they've been turned down, they're out of the competition, and they're basically saying, but your requirement said double action, and you want the Colt, and the Colt is single action. What the heck? Not in those words, obviously, but it's pretty obvious that they are politely annoyed by the fact that the War Office has given a specification that's super light and double action. That was another major requirement, and then completely reneged on that by fancying this design, which is single action, i.e. you have the pistol has to cycle the hammer back itself. You can't just fire it by putting through on the trigger, which is a feature of things like the PPK and this Webley offering. So it's funny to see the sort of frustration of, we've tried to meet the requirement and the War Office have moved the goalposts because someone at the Ministry of Supply or the War Office likes this American pistol. And to be fair, it would have been, I think, a great choice at the time. But of course, what ended up transpiring is the Browning just gets fleeted, as we would say today, across the whole armed forces. And yeah, it's bigger and heavier than this. They throw that requirement completely out the window. But it is 9mm, and it is, it's pretty close to this. It's a single-action self-loading pistol, Browning design. They're both, well, basically Browning in design. But this does not. This just gets kicked to the curb as well. So for all of the praise that they're giving the Colt, saying that we are very interested in this design, and even telling the rival supplier Webley that we're getting rid of you because we like this. I think it's almost like a sort of jilted boyfriend situation. It's very strange to read. So this goes away for about 20 years, and then it comes back in the form of the Combat Commander, but in that classic 45 caliber that America is still in love with to this very day. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget, as well as our online presence, our Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, we do have real-life museums that you can come and visit here in the UK if you're fortunate enough to be in the area. If you are, we have our Bank Holiday Weekend in August event, which is jousting, which we are somewhat known for here. No guns, I'm afraid, but it's still extremely entertaining. people actually going at each other with extremely large pointy sticks at the end of the day. This is going to be the Smashes, as we have dubbed it, which is Australia versus England. So all the more incentive to come and see the rivalry on display in true medieval fashion here at the Armouries. But we'll see you again next week.